Tonight, as ceasefire talks continue, we're focusing on concerns that the war in Gaza could spiral into a wider regional conflict. Earlier today, Israel said it would soon decide whether to launch an offensive in Lebanon, where it has clashed with the Iran-backed group Hezbollah for months. Now, those clashes have intensified in recent days, with munitions coming over the border into northern Israel and sparking brush fires there. This Wednesday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country was prepared for what he called intense action in the north, and that security would be restored one way or another. France 24's Eliza Herbert reports.
On a visit to Israel's border with Lebanon, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered strong words.
We are prepared for a very intense operation in the north. One way or another, we will restore security to the north.
His trip to the northern city of Kiryat Shimona came after the region was engulfed in forest fires earlier this week, when Hezbollah strikes hit an area of hot, dry and windy conditions, leading to the evacuation of several residents. The city, however, has been largely empty for the last 8 months due to regular fire between Israeli troops and Iran-backed Hezbollah fighters. On both sides of the border, tens of thousands of people have fled their homes in what has been the worst conflict between Israel and Hezbollah since they went to war in 2006. According to AFP, at least 455 people have been killed in Lebanon, including 88 civilians, and the Israeli army has said at least 14 of their soldiers and 11 civilians have been killed since October. Netanyahu's words come at a time when cross-border fighting has been intensifying, and just a day after the chief of the Israel Defense Force said the army was approaching a decision point.
Hezbollah has increased its attacks in recent days, and we are prepared, after a very good process of training up to the level of a general staff exercise, to move to an offensive in the north.
With the situation becoming increasingly untenable, the US has said Washington does not want to see an all-out war. Meanwhile, Human Rights Watch released a report on Wednesday accusing Israel of violating international law with the widespread use of white phosphorus in southern Lebanon, which could put civilians at risk. And the diplomatic service of the European Union said they are concerned about the ever-growing destruction and forced displacement of civilians on both sides of the border.
And for more on this story, I'm joined by Stephen Cook, a senior fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for being with us here on France 24. What are the chances, in your view, that this could spiral into an all-out war between Israel and Hezbollah like we saw in 2006?
Oh, I think the chances are very, very high that this is going to happen. And that's why you see the Israelis preparing in the north. They simply cannot live with Hezbollah up on the Israeli border for fear of, one, an October 7th style attack on Israeli border communities that really are right on the border. And two, Hezbollah has been using munitions that end up deep into Israeli territory, making the northern part of Israel uninhabitable. So absent a diplomatic initiative that would solve this problem and push Hezbollah back beyond the Litani River, which is some miles north of the Lebanese-Israel border, the Israelis vowed to take military action to push Hezbollah back. We are, as the Israeli chief of staff said, getting close to that moment.
Well, so a Hezbollah leader told the broadcaster Al Jazeera yesterday that the group does not want a full-blown war, but at the same time asserting that it's prepared for one. How equipped is Hezbollah for a full-out war with Israel?
I think you should take it with a grain of salt when Hezbollah says it doesn't want a full-out war, given how often they have been firing on Israeli positions since October 8th. But nevertheless, this is a very different kind of conflict that the Israelis would be fighting, given the large store of rockets and missiles and precision munitions that Hezbollah has. Some estimates are between 100,000 and 150,000 rockets and missiles that can reach all parts of Israel. So this would be something that would certainly pose a general risk to the Israeli public in the same way that October 7th, as horrific as it was, did not pose a risk to the broader Israeli public.
But do you think that the war in Gaza is playing into that response from Hezbollah, meaning, Hezbollah is looking at the destruction in Gaza and saying to itself, it doesn't want the same result in Lebanon?
Well, certainly part of the Israeli strategy in Gaza and the Israeli strategy in the north up to this point is to do as much damage as possible to send a message to Hezbollah's leaders. Certainly, the images coming out of Gaza, as well as the damage that the Israelis have done already to Hezbollah infrastructure along the border, one would think has already given the Hezbollah leadership some pause. But as this conflict has continued, Hezbollah has grown bolder and bolder in its attacks on Israel. And as I said, firing deeper and deeper into Israeli territory.
Well, so meanwhile, ceasefire talks continue to bring a pause to the fighting in Gaza under terms that were outlined by President Biden last Friday. But it's a bit confusing because President Biden has said this was an Israeli proposal, and Netanyahu has made some conflicting statements about it. So given all of that, from your viewpoint, do you think that the two sides can come to an agreement here?
Well, I don't think that there's really any basis for an agreement. And it's important to recognize that after the president's speech, White House officials were at pains to make it clear that this was the White House's interpretation of an Israeli proposal. And that's where you get the difference between what the president said and what the Israelis say they believe they have agreed to. And that is that the Israelis believe in between phase 1 and phase 2 of this plan that the president outlined, they would retain the right to continue to prosecute military operations to destroy Hamas. That was something that I think President Biden left purposefully ambiguous to put pressure on the Israeli government. Of course, Hamas wants from phase 1 there to be a ceasefire that is durable. Thus, Hamas lives to fight another day. That's something that the Israelis can agree upon. So, credit to the CIA Director Bill Burns and his counterparts in Egypt and Qatar, but there doesn't really seem to be a basis for a ceasefire if the Israelis insist that they must continue their military operations to destroy Hamas, and Hamas insists that it will not be destroyed, and its condition for a ceasefire is that Israel withdraw completely from the Gaza Strip for a durable cessation of hostilities.
In an interview with Time magazine, President Biden seemed to suggest that Benjamin Netanyahu could be prolonging the war for his own political survival. That's quite a striking admission given the White House's ongoing military support for Israel. What would a ceasefire or an end to the war mean for Benjamin Netanyahu?
Well, it depends on how the war ends, of course. I think what the president was getting at was the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu's partners on the extreme right, who control 14 seats in the Knesset, have said that they would bolt from the government if he agreed to the deal as outlined by President Biden, which, of course, then if this government falls, would leave Prime Minister Netanyahu actually in legal jeopardy over a corruption case going back a number of years. That's, I think, the most generous interpretation of what President Biden was getting at in that interview with Time magazine. If, of course, the conflict comes to an end where the Israelis have killed Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind behind October 7th, and have actually made it difficult for Hamas to threaten Israel's security in the same way that it did on October 7th, that would be beneficial for everyone and certainly beneficial for Prime Minister Netanyahu's political fortunes, which actually have been rising recently.
I guess one of the big unanswered questions is what happens after this war is over. The desire expressed widely by the U.S. and the EU is for a two-state solution, but you have some hardliners in the Israeli government suggesting an occupation of Gaza.
Well, I think we broaden it and not just look at Israel. Of course, Hamas, which is the major political actor in Palestinian politics, attacked Israel because they are one-staters. Their goal was to liberate all of Palestine from north to south, not just the liberation of the Gaza Strip or the West Bank. So you do have extremists on both sides who have their own plans. And certainly the Netanyahu's partners on the right have made the argument that settlement of the Gaza Strip is the best way to secure Israel. They point out to the fact that in between 1967 and 2005, when Israel did occupy the Gaza Strip, Israel didn't have these types of security problems. That's a more potent political argument now than it was arguably on October 6th. And that's why you're seeing more and more support for it within Israel, although still a minority, a larger number than one might expect.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Stephen Cook, Senior Fellow for Middle East Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for joining us here on France 24.
My pleasure.
And that's it for now. Stay tuned for more world news still to come here on France 24.